this and save it for the future. And okay, there we go. Welcome to the Contemporary Issues Sunday School class. Glad to have everybody here. And we are going to talk with Pastor Kendall Brotzman today about the pastoral care at St. Andrew and about Pride Month and everything that's going on with that. So it's a busy time. We want to know what she's been doing and what the whole care program is about. But before we do that, let's do any announcements we have. Things. It was interesting to see Akila's final day with us and her sermon send-off today. And tomorrow, at least one of the new pastors comes to St. Andrew, Jerry Butler. I'm going to help him move in a little bit to his place. And then there's another one. I forgot.
Is it Lauren?
Lauren Boyd, right? Yeah, is the new small group pastor starting. So new era for them. Lots of stuff going on. Any other announcements anybody have about things? Places you've been or things coming up? I invited Harvey March to speak next Sunday about things he's working on. So we'll see if Harvey does that. He hadn't given me an answer yet. And talk about.
But since we've announced it in front of 30 people with him sitting right here,
Yes,
I'm willing to bet.
Right, we'll see. We'll see if he accepts. There's Harvey. I just clicked over to my second screen. I didn't see you come on yet, Harvey, but glad to see you there.
No pressure.
So what's your answer? You have one for us yet?
Right there. We're glad to have you join us, Harvey. Can't hear you at the moment, but that's okay. Great. And we're going to talk about fake news one of these Sundays too, news outlets and how it gets reported, all these things going on. So we got a lot of good topics
here, so you can.
But let's go ahead and welcome Kendall. Kendall's our pastor of care, all types of care for the church. And Kendall came from California. What city in California were you in, Kendall?
San Diego.
San Diego.
Yep.
Close to Mark? Where
Well,
Mark was?
For folks who don't know it, Mark was my first pastor as a youth. I happened to walk into his church plant one day, and that's how this whole journey got started.
Oh, that's awesome. That is so cool.
When Mark Feldmeyer comes calling, you better believe that something in your life is about to change. And now I live in Colorado.
Right. And Kendall got into the Methodist Church about age 15 or 16, I remember reading. And she's also a hospital chaplain here, working the night shift, Kendall, at 2 hospitals, and she'll tell us about that too. And so we just want to welcome you and let you say anything before we start peppering you with questions about what congregational care does.
Well, like I said, and Vicky's not allowed to do it, but I'm going to ask any one of you fine Christians if you would open us in prayer.
Good idea. Who's a good prayer?
It doesn't matter who's a good.
Or a mediocre prayer.
That's right.
Okay.
Or somebody that.
Okay, well, I'm a mediocre prayer. I'd be glad to do that. Lord, we thank you for having Kendall with us today and Harvey and new folks joining us. We have 37 today, and we're thankful for every one of them. You do great things through St. Andrew and through us. We ask you to be with all the crazy things going on in our society today and be with everyone from the top to the bottom. We thank you for all your blessings. Amen. Okay.
Amen.
Well, Kendall, tell us generally about congregational care. What all does it include? It's more than just hospital visits, right?
Right. It's a whole number of things. We have quite a few teams. Everyone is kind of under the umbrella of congregational care minister. And that was part of the change that happened. Gosh, I think it was last year. but my timing's all off at this point. But I've only been here for just over 2 years, so I think it was last year. So this was a model that came out of, or comes out of Church of the Resurrection out in Leawood, Kansas, which is kind of better known as Adam Hamilton's church. And I have some friends who work there and got to know their executive pastor of congregational care there, and just had lots of conversations with her about here's where I'd like to be with care. And so all of that to say, all of our congregational care ministers, whatever team they're serving on, they're all trained the same way. They all go through the same training, whether they're doing letter writing or phone calls or whether they're doing visits. And the training is kind of like what you need to get going. And then as things come up, we focus training around, what the needs are. So when there's been a lot of loss, we may look at grief more intentionally. Every now and then we'll talk about communication skills. Those are ones that are just super helpful for me to do refresher on. But what that allows us to do is, if a congregational care minister, has a health crisis come up, and they don't feel comfortable doing visits or they can't do visits, they can hop over to the team that does phone calls easily. And I know that everyone's been trained the same way, and there's no more elite status anywhere. Everyone kind of knows what they're doing, no matter what role they're in. And so I really value that. And there's a lot of communication between the congregational care ministers and what's going on with their care recipients. So they're updating me weekly. So what they do is, obviously right now it looks a little bit different, but in the usual world, they would be going to visit with people who are going through some sort of crisis, whether that's a healthcare thing, whether that is just a difficult time in their family relationships, really whatever it might be. They've met with me, or they've talked on the phone with me, and we've kind of just talked about what sort of support they might need for that time. And it's intended, and it's not always the case that this is true, but it's intended to be, ideally, we don't want people to need us. My hope when I meet with people in my office is that we can process through what are the skills that they need, how does their faith give them strength to endure whatever it is going on, so that they don't feel like they need to meet with me weekly. And that's my hope with the congregational care ministers too, is that eventually, and some people develop friendships, which is great, and then we sort of conclude the caregiving relationship, and they go off and pursue friendships, which is wonderful. We're a church community, so that's great. But ideally, people don't live in crisis forever, and so part of this new model is about really making sure that we're assessing if somebody's in crisis. And if they're in crisis for such a lengthy period of time, then there's probably other resources that we can be providing, whether that's support groups or whether that's help facilitating more professional therapy, whether that is financial counseling, whatever it might be. So congregational care ministers, they'll be doing visits, sometimes hospital visits, seeing our people in facilities. Part of what I love about this new program, and part of what I've been working on a lot since last year, has been I do all the memorials and funeral services and things. They fall to me first, and then if I can't, if I'm not available, or if there's a scheduling conflict of some kind, then it goes to another clergy person. And so I've been doing lots of memorials, and I would ask a Judy pick any Judy, just going to Aquila's sermon. There's like 15 Judys and they all seem to know everything. But I would ask a Judy, I'd say, I don't recognize this name. And when we look in our database, it looks like they haven't really been active. Who is this person? And usually a Judy would say, well, they were really active. And then however many years ago, there was a Alzheimer's diagnosis, or there was something health related that came up and they weren't able to get to church. And so they kind of dropped off. And that broke my heart. And so one of the teams that I think I'm most proud of is we've been finding people out there in the weeds, just looking for all of our people who are in facilities who haven't been able to come to church, and trying to show up for them. And it's usually a ministry of presence. And I tell my congregational care ministers, this might be a ministry where you show up one day and then the next day you come, they're not going to remember who you are at all. But that's the ministry. That's what I did as a hospice chaplain. And it is important. It is a value of mine as a congregational care minister that we don't lose people, and that we continue to show up and be the church for them, even if you have the same conversation every time you go and visit. At least that person in that moment knows that there's somebody there who's praying with them, who's going to tell them that they're loved by their church community. And we hope that families see that as well. And families do, and St. Andrew is kind of becoming more known through people who don't come to the church, just as people who show up. So that was a lot of me talking. Yeah.
That's okay. How often do the CCMs meet with their care recipients?
Yeah,
Weekly
so
or monthly? Is there a schedule, Kendall?
well, right now, like I said, that's really difficult, particularly for our folks in facilities, because a lot of facilities are asking us not to show up. And so they're doing cards. We're trying to do phone calls, but if you've ever tried to call somebody on the phone who is kind of fairly advanced with Alzheimer's and dementia, it becomes more confusing for them and less helpful than being physically present. So that's been a challenge. But for folks who are going through, so I'll say we have our homebound team, and then we have our called like general care team as well. And for those folks, I ask the care recipient and the congregational care minister to discern within themselves, what's appropriate. In other models, there's been sort of a fixed, like you need to meet weekly. And what I found is that for folks who are going through crisis, who don't even know what they're gonna eat for breakfast that day, or if they ate breakfast, or that putting something that regular on the calendar can be overwhelming. And so I really give them the freedom to discern
And how many,
often they meet.
okay, and how many do you have? How many CCM providers, and do you need more?
We are absolutely going to need more. We have 30 right now, and Rev Mark has very big plans for St. Andrew, and so I think right now St. Andrew's on the cusp of becoming much bigger, and part of that is we've hit sort of a ceiling organizationally, where there's like a threshold that if we go above, St. Andrew's staff as its current makeup likely won't be able to hold or to meet if it goes above. But with the new makeup of clergy and the plans that Rev Mark has for them and their ministries and building up lay leaders, I think St. Andrew is poised to grow quite a bit. And so we can always use congregational care ministers because there are always people who need care. Oh, you're muted, Steve. It'd be the easiest question I have today.
There we go. Yeah, that would be easy. Well, my dog's at my feet eating a bone, so I'm having to mute the chomping sound. But Kendall, we want to know about your hospital visits too. What do you do when you do hospital visits? Do you work every night at the hospital as a hospital chaplain? And what's that like when a pandemic? What is going on?
Yeah, it's interesting right now. So as a pastor, I can't go into hospitals, and I think some hospitals are starting to allow community clergy to come in for surgery visits and that sort of thing. So if you do have a surgery coming up, or if you're in a hospital for whatever reason, like knock on wood, I don't have wood around me, but knock on wood that I think paper counts as wood, that you don't need to be in the hospital, but check with your hospital, and if they will allow me to come in as a pastor, then I am happy to do that. But I also work Tuesdays and Wednesdays at the UC Health Highlands Ranch Hospital on call as a chaplain, and then at St. Joe's in downtown, usually Thursday nights, some weeks Mondays and Thursday nights.
And is that separate? Is that separate from your St. Andrew work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and a big part of that is, quite honestly, because the pandemic, my wife's on the job hunt. She doesn't have a job heading into the new school year, and so I'm just doing whatever I can to help provide. So I am grateful, as busy as it does keep me, and as much as last week I did not sleep very much. But hospital chaplaincy is kind of, in many ways, feels a little bit like home. It's where I came from in my professional work, and there's something about being in a clinical setting, working with an interdisciplinary team, that is comforting in some ways.
What
So
do you do when you're in the hospital? Do you go room to room, Kendall, or are you given the names of folks who have requested a pastor? How does it work?
yeah. So the different hospitals work differently. The Highlands Ranch Hospital is one where I don't have to be on site, and they will call me in. Typically, they are calling me in for an end of life of some sort, whether that's an adult or whether that is a little one, a baby. And so there, for the most part, I am showing up for end of lives on the intensive care unit, or in the emergency department where it's been very sudden and unexpected, or I'm going to labor and delivery to care for parents who've just lost a little one. So there I get called in. St. Joe's works differently. I'm on site all night for 12 hours. And if the sleep rooms on all these medical TV shows, they're not that glamorous, like in real life. They're these like little tiny things, and you don't really sleep all that much. And I certainly don't wake up like all the doctors do, looking pretty.
And you're wearing scrubs too these
I
days,
am.
right?
I'm wearing scrubs. Last Thursday, so I get paged. I walk around with a pager. At a certain point in the night, I only respond to the pager. But at St. Joe's, I'm helping patients fill out advance directives, which like I'm 30 years old, and I have worked through an advance directive. I think everybody should have an advance directive, because it's just important for your loved ones to know what your preferences are at the end of life. 5 Wishes is a great booklet. There's actually lots of paperwork that I have to do at St. Joe's that I'm just now learning. And most of that is around end of life. But I do get called to psychiatric crises which is, again, kind of like home for me. My clinical training is in behavioral health, and kind of my niche in pastoral care is around mental health and substance use and recovery. That's areas where I thrive, I'll say, professionally. So yeah, for the first couple of hours, I'm running around doing those sorts of referrals, and then I get to sleep until I get paged. And that could be to a pre-surgical visit. Again, St. Joe's has a very big labor and delivery. I think they are the most or second in the state for babies, how many babies are born there. And so that also means that there are lots of babies who wind up in the NICU or who don't make it there. And I'm present for those. Sometimes I get called to baptize, do an emergency baptism for those little ones, which is heartbreaking and beautiful. And don't tell the bishop that I'm not ordained and I do baptisms.
Okay.
But if a parent calls me and says, my baby's not going to make it, I want you to do a baptism.
Yeah.
I'm baptizing the baby.
Yeah. Okay, we won't tell anybody. Hey, Kendall, I want to open this up to anybody that wants to ask a question. Just be informal here. You'll have to unmute yourself probably on the lower left corner of your screen.
Harvey wants to ask a question.
Yeah, but please feel free to jump in and ask Kendall a question. But if nobody's going to at the moment, I will continue.
Harvey wants to.
Harvey wants to? I didn't see Harvey. Yeah, go ahead, Harvey. Harvey, you're not muted. We can't hear you.
You are muted.
We can't hear you. Let's see.
What about Harvey? Don't you have my cell phone number? Can you text me?
Harvey, I don't have Harvey muted, but we can't hear you, Harvey. It might be your microphone or something. Sorry
I'll
about
jump
that.
in here. I can jump in here while he's getting set up.
Okay, I
Kendall,
checked that, Harvey. Go ahead.
Kendall, could you give us a little bit of an idea of your background in training and what you did prior to coming here? Did you work in hospice, or what was your experience prior to coming here?
Yeah, I kind of was all over. So I went to seminary and graduated in 2015. And during that time, my first chaplaincy internship was at a halfway house in the Tenderloin district in California, San Francisco, California, which is one of the higher crime areas and in the city. And so I was working with men and women transitioning out of federal and state prisons, and working with them on reentry. And then from there, I did an internship mostly because I wanted to work with this chaplain. At this point, she's the only female chaplain with the rank of colonel in the Army. And she's going to find out sometime this summer if she's going to be granted 1-star general. But she was at Ground Zero on 9/11. She worked with Rwandan refugees in the 90s around, particularly the women, around sexual trauma. She's been to Afghanistan, and I wanted to learn from her. So that took me to an Air Force Base medical center, and was assigned to the psych unit there with active duty retirees and vets, and anticipated a lot of older PTSD vets, and came across, more often than not, a lot of 20-year-old major depression, active duty, but once you have a psychiatric crisis in the military, they kick you out. And so kids who are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives, after kind of finding home in the military at a young age. So from there, I did a chaplaincy residency, which is an intensive 1-year program where they kind of put you through the ringer and you realize all the things that are informing why you do what you do, and learn grief care, crisis care, all sorts of things in a clinical setting. And I was assigned to the behavioral health hospital, working with my youngest patient was 8 years old, diagnosed schizophrenia, which is a rare diagnosis for an 8-year-old, but she was that acute. My oldest patient was 91 or 92, bipolar, and then everything sort of in between, in addition to recovery as well. And then from there, after my training, that healthcare system hired me on to work in acute care and ICUs and emergency departments, and their trauma program as well, while also working as a hospice chaplain. So I was kind of doing a whole number of things. And then Mark called me up one day after not talking to me for 10 years. Because he moved around, not for any real reason. They moved these Methodists around. And,
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody.
And so when I looked down at my phone and saw Mark Feldmeyer's name pop up, he did one of those, just wanted to talk to you about where you're at. And then I said, well, I don't know if I'm interested in moving to Colorado. And he's like, well, just send your resume and then we'll just throw it in and see if the committee is even interested. I'm like, okay, fine. And then he's like, well, just read through the job description and let me know. And then finally, the final interview. Well, we want you. You coming? Oh, I guess so.
That's pretty
That's
cool.
great.
Let's see. I got a text from Harvey. Where are you in your journey toward ordination? And what do I do for self-care? Oh, self-care.
Good
Very good at
question.
teaching it.
Good question. Go ahead, Kendall.
Working on my ordination process still. There's probably some bits and things about that that are going to change, but I probably need to tell the bishop and the district committee before I share more publicly. But hopefully can reveal more on that. I do anticipate that I will be ordained probably within the next year. So I'm excited about that. It's been a long road. And self-care, I have gotten lots of concerns about this, as people have learned about the 3 jobs. But I do actually not work formally on any of my jobs on Friday and Saturday. But that also changes because I am on call 24/7 for the church. So if you ever were in a crisis of some sort, day or night, you could call the church, and there's instructions on the main phone that will take you to my cell phone, and my cell phone is on. And although there will be 1 week in a couple of weeks where I'm going somewhere that is out of cell phone service range for a vacation. And my wife has found that is the only way I stop working. So.
Very good. Go ahead, Vicki.
Kendall.
Loud.
Kendall, can you hear me?
Over here.
Yes.
Okay. I think you are like this from the visiting that you and I've had, but I think a lot of self-care for someone that does a lot of what you do comes in the form of caring for others. It's rewarding, and it feeds you and satisfies you to the point that you can get peace about some things. I think that's right about you. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. I had a mentor tell me when I was anxious about an ordination interview, and And he said, the best way, and this is what I suggest to people, one of the best ways that we can care for ourselves is to refocus and serve others in some way. And typically when we're going through something very difficult and challenging, it feels like our whole world is that thing, whatever that thing is. And sometimes a way to get rest from that thing that feels like it is our entire world is to look at somebody else's needs and see how we can serve them. I will say, a big learning for me from a clinical setting, I experienced lots of hard things in a clinical setting. End of life for a baby is never something that I really, it takes some effort to recover from professionally for those sorts of calls. However, there's what one of my learnings becoming a local church pastor is I think I experienced more loss in this setting, and I say that. And what I mean is, I love you people. And when you die, it makes me sad. And so, I think of Diane Holmes was probably the first one that really, really hit me because we developed such a close relationship. And then I lost her. And that's the call of the local church pastors. We're called to come and love you all. And I didn't realize how much I would lose in taking on this role.
Very good. Kendall, before I move into asking you about the Supreme Court decision and the other LGBTQ things going on, tell us what you're hearing about isolation in the pandemic. Are older folks like us saying we feel isolated, and young folks saying we don't feel isolated at all? Or is that not a correct assessment?
I think it's both. I really do think it's both. I think the biggest thing for younger folks is when you're younger, you hit a lot of milestones really quickly, whether that's graduating high school, turning 18, being able to drive, graduating college, maybe getting married. Like, it all sort of happens within a few years, or within a relatively short amount of time, versus once for me, getting into 30, I think maybe my next milestone might be kids, but for the most part, it officially kind of starts to die off in some ways, those milestones. And so for younger folks, they're grieving a lot. I don't think that they know that they're grieving, or would call it that. And so there's been lots of education around, we grieve the loss of things. If you have ever lost something that was really valuable and important, and suddenly it is in the great abyss somewhere that is your house and you can't find it, that is sad, especially if it's a special memento or something, right? So I think our younger folks are experiencing grief in a way that they likely haven't encountered in their lives. Many of them haven't encountered in their lives yet. And our older folks, especially like our older single folks, are pretty isolated. And there's some folks in the current, so Jim Holmes's Covenant group reached out really early on and said, hey, we want to make calls to folks who are single, who are maybe just stuck at home a lot because they feel really vulnerable during this time of pandemic. And they're in that, whether it's a underlying health concern or whether it's age or whatever it might be, they're staying pretty close to home. And so we sent a list of names on over to them, and they've been making phone calls and just trying to be a touchstone. I think technology is also a big issue. There's some folks, and we try to put it out there that like if you have technology needs, we'll help you walk through Zoom and all those other things. But I know that there's some folks in the congregation that they're not doing anything, which amazes me because I'm like, I can help you with the technology. But they seem to be doing fine. That I'm thinking of one couple in particular who's married, and I think they're just ornery. But I love them, and they refuse to walk through a Zoom tutorial with me. But yeah, isolation is a big one, and as much as I know that for our homebound folks, lots of them have memory care needs. It kills me that we can't visit them, even if they won't remember that visit. Spiritually, I think they remember, you know.
Kendall, we've got about 22 minutes left. I want to leave some time to talk with you about gay issues going on. And I want to ask first about what is the status of the United Methodist Church? Are they, as we know, last we heard, they were going to prosecute gay and LGBTQ pastors and cause problems. What's going on with that? Is it all on hold until the next general conference?
Prosecute them for what?
I think it is. I think the pandemic sort of threw everybody for a loop, and so folks on all sides are just saying, let's just like take a minute and and we'll see when we all get back together again what the status of the church is. But yeah, the traditional plan is in effect right now. I think with the announcement of the what is it? The protocol or the I think the protocol is the language. I think once that was announced in early January, late December-ish, I want to say, I think everyone's expectation is that will eventually be voted on, and in the meantime, everyone's just sort of waiting until an opportunity when that can be voted on.
And that's the plan for the conservatives to leave the denomination, and then the remaining U.S. Liberals to approve the changes to the language.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's still on track. Good deal.
I think so.
Okay.
So.
Well, tell us also about the big Supreme Court case about transgender rights that was just done a week or so ago. And that, let me just read a sentence from news reports about what it was, and then you tell us what you think about it, what it means. New York Times reported Supreme Court ruled that gay and transgender workers cannot be fired from their workplace merely because they are gay or transgender. That defies the law, said Justice Neil Gorsuch in a 6-3 ruling. This comes after talk in the culture also about bathrooms, locker rooms, sports, pronouns, and religious objections, but this focused really on making it illegal to fire workers based on being gay, bisexual, or transgender. And it was not well known that in many of the states, there was no federal protection for transgender workers at all until this ruling. So it really was a big deal. Is that right, Kendall?
Yeah, it is. It's a big deal. It is a big deal. I know there have been times, so I've been with my wife for almost 10 years now. I think we start year 10 in December. But she certainly had jobs where she has not been out for fear that if her more conservative boss found out, that she would be fired. So yeah, it's a big deal, and it's a step. It's even a bigger deal that a more conservative justice wrote the opinion. So I hope that means good things moving forward in the future. There's still a lot more work to do, and I'm sure that there will be some who say, when is enough enough? What's going to make you all happy? But
What do you say to them?
Well, if like for instance for myself, if we ever decided to move a hop, skip, and a jump over to Kansas, we'd have a lot of less protections there. I don't have any plans of moving to Kansas. No offense to Kansas, but it's a scary place for a LGBTQ person. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Adoption and fostering is still very difficult for LGBTQ folks in some parts of the state, and just some. I think we'll get to it later, but some less explicit homophobia that's more ingrained into different systems, in the same way that racism is ingrained into systems in our culture, though the laws may look different.
Kendall, I have a question. How do you feel about your sexual preference or anyone's sexual preference being on a resume or on a job application or any type of a form? How do you feel about that? I mean, is that necessary?
I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to reorient myself because I've working in the church world, right? For instance, my ordination process, usually every meeting I have, whether it's supportive or less supportive, always has to involve my sexual orientation. Well, I shouldn't say it has to. I say it's made part of the discussion by whoever is interviewing me. And I would just rather we move on. That being said, I'm very, there is the pride culture of LGBTQ folks, and we have pride parades, and that has come out of the Stonewall riot, where LGBTQ folks said enough is enough and fought against the police that were raiding and being violent towards them. And now we have pride parades. I think there is something valuable to me being in religious leadership, particularly for our LGBTQ youth. So I would love a world in which it doesn't matter. And because it does matter to so many people, I have to look at what my leadership and who God is calling me to be in my leadership, and how I present myself. And I would love a post-gender, sexual orientation, racial world, but we're not in it. Yeah.
Well, I want to open it to anybody else. Don't hesitate if you got a question for Kendall. Go ahead.
Say, Kendall.
Go ahead, Gene.
Gene Dawson, very helpful. Thank you so much for sharing on a very human level with all of us. What is your preference when addressing yourself, pronouns? What is your preference? Just Kendall? Do you prefer a non-binary greeting? What would you advise us, if you would, please?
Thanks for that question. And, you know, if you asked me probably sometime last fall, my pronouns would be she and her. Right now, I think I just prefer Kendall.
Kendall, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Kendall, we're Dave and Toby Montgomery. We don't know you. We haven't had a crisis, so we haven't gotten to know you.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. We're fairly new to the state of Colorado. We've only been here, year and a half. Could you just give a general description of the state of protections? What's Colorado like legally for gender equality and so forth?
You know, I think I'm less familiar about like the legal protections. Everything I've encountered has said that you know, folks with well, I shouldn't say everything. I would say everything in the Denver metro area. So I guess I can only kind of speak to informally, because when I took the job, I knew that Mark was never going to fire me for being LGBTQ, and so that's kind of what I knew. But yeah, so I can't speak to legal as well, and I don't want to speak to it if I'm not a little bit more well versed in it. I will say that as somebody who looks the way I do, and as somebody who's, you know, married to a woman, we take precautions whenever we're out. I very much struggle with restrooms. In fact, you will never find me in a restroom with multiple stalls, even in the church, because I've had so many close encounters, whether it's with people or whether it's with police or whether it's whatever it might be, where I wonder if I'm going to get out of the situation without getting physically hurt in some way. And so my preference is single-use restrooms, but when we travel anywhere outside of the city, my wife will remain in the restroom with me until I'm ready to go, and then she'll walk out with me. If that's not the case, if I'm traveling on my own, I always look for Starbucks, because Starbucks has single-use restrooms for the most part, no matter where you go. So whatever state I'm in, I think I won't get in trouble if I stop at a Starbucks. And if that's not the case, then I've got my ID on me and I've got my phone on me, and a way to set something off if I need to in an emergency. Yeah, for instance, and I know that I think we'll get to the Black Lives Matters piece of things, but
Yes.
it was quite jarring for me when I saw police in the church on Sunday mornings. My first experience of that, because I've not had the best experiences with law enforcement being a queer person. And in fact, I remember Akila's first Sunday, and I'd forgotten to tell her, and I ran over and I said, just so you know, there's police here, and they're here every Sunday, and they're great people, and here are their names, but but when I am not immediately, I do not immediately feel safe when I see someone in uniform.
So Kendall, you could relate to the Black Lives Matter testimonies about how blacks are stopped and not understood what they're doing and they're persecuted. You've had that happen also, obviously.
Yeah, for different reasons, but and depends on where you're at in the country or in the world, right? But yeah, I do not feel immediately comforted by the presence of law enforcement, because my previous experiences as queer, existing as queer in the world, I guess.
And Kendall, do you use queer to mean non-binary, not identifying with completely with man or woman gender definition?
I think queer is just like a good, it's a good catch-all, and and I use it as an adjective. So I've had some folks in the past say, so I would call them queers, and I'm like, no, 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 don't call them. Queer is not a noun. Queer as a noun was used in a derogatory way, and it's been reclaimed as an adjective to describe folks. So I use it because my gender preference and my sexual orientation, it can all kind of fit under one umbrella. But that may not be the case for others who prefer, different language. That's just mine.
Okay. So go ahead, Vicki.
It's obvious to me that our problem as a society is that we're not educated enough, and that we're not educated by people like yourself who are willing to just be frank and open with us about how you feel and what you need. And it's so much easier, I think, for me to understand where you're coming from when I have someone that will be honest, no matter how painful it might be for either one of us. And I so appreciate your being candid with us. And I hope that it becomes easier for you, because we love you and we want you to educate us in a way that helps us all to become better in society. And thank you for that.
Well, and just to that point, I've been, as I'm sure lots of you have, in the last month or so, been kind of thrown into how do we do like anti-racist work, right? And so I've been trying to, one of the ways that we do this, to amplify voices of color. And I'm like, great. So then I'm like reading voices of color and posting on social media. And then I read something that said, if you're only sharing their voices and not adding your own voice, well, then that's problematic. And I'm like, well, I thought I wasn't supposed to say anything because I'm a white person when you listen to their voices. And so it's like these constant, like, oh, am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? I'm just trying to be better, but it can be so difficult sometimes. And I think that's true with folks trying to learn, what the different letters are in LGBTQ, and it can go on and on and on. And I know that's true for me as well. And so it can feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then sometimes what are the questions that we don't know are the questions that we need to be asking. And so I think, but it's like learning a new muscle. We go out of the gate and we try to bench press 250 pounds, and it's probably not going to work out so well. And so we readjust, and we probably pull something in the process, and try to do better and come at it differently.
Yeah. Kendall, we've got about 5 minutes left. Tell us a little more about how you and other LGBTQ folks feel about the Black Lives Matter movement that's going on, the protest, the heightened awareness. How does everybody look at that?
Yeah, I think the intersection of it. Well, how do I want to say this? I think I more readily, and probably a lot of folks who identify as LGBTQ, more readily accept the stories from people of color who are saying, and now we have film, we have film evidence of a lot of these instances, but are saying that they felt this this prejudice and discrimination, and sometimes overt violence, right, from law enforcement. And I think I'll use I statements. I more readily accept that truth because I felt it. Because it scares me when I get pulled over and I'm driving through Kansas on the way to see friends of mine who work at Church of the Resurrection. In fact, it happened a couple years ago, and it terrified me. And I have my business card, and I said, I'm a pastor, and he didn't even pull me over for any reason. And so that's scary. And because I felt that, I think, do I more readily accept that somebody who's not white experiences that? Like 100%. To my benefit, when I get pulled over, is I'm white. And to my benefit is that I can pass as a man, which sometimes I try to do so that I won't get hurt. Because if they think that I'm not a man, people don't think that I'm a man, then sometimes they think different, and different can lead to violence. So I'm speaking for myself. We have lots of video proof now of what's happened to people of color. The intersectionality piece, and intersectionality is just sort of to say that, and you all probably are familiar with the term intersectionality, but it's just to say that none of our identities are separate from one another. So when I walk through life, I don't just walk through life as white. I also walk through life as a white queer person, or a woman of color, walks through life as both a woman and as a person of color. And then, you walk through life with whatever your political ideology is. You walk through life with whatever your socioeconomic status. And so like a white person who is not financially very well off, living in West Virginia, their life is going to look different than a white person living in like Beverly Hills in California. So all of that's to say is just all of that informs how we experience our lives, and where I see the intersectionality a lot with LGBTQ rights and with Black Lives Matter is that Black trans women are murdered at an alarmingly, murdered in general is bad, but they experience more hate crimes and are murdered far more often than white trans women. And that's something to pay attention to.
Do you think this current momentum is going to continue for the Black movement, and will it help also the gay movement and the Latino immigration issue and others? Do you think we're in a changing culture faster now, Kendall?
I come from a pretty a family with a lot of Republicans, and they sometimes look at me. I don't really share my political affiliation, but somehow they get the sense that I'm more liberal. But one of them the other day sent me something that Joe Biden, that guy, sometimes he just will say so many things that he should say differently. But he said something that said, it's like the death of George Floyd will have more impact in the world than Martin Luther King. Very problematic to say, but what he meant, and as he elaborates, is that the technology that we have now that broadcasts the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Elijah McClain and and all of these names. The technology, as painful, it's very painful to watch those videos. In a lot of ways, it re-traumatizes people of color that this can just be shared so widely. But there are protests happening all over the world now, in a way that MLK's death just could not be transmitted that quickly and that far wide at the time of his death. And so I don't think George Floyd is MLK, and I don't think that Biden believes that either. Oh, we just got to filter all these people so much. But I do think that technology means that this won't die down as quickly. Black Lives Matter movement began in 2013 with the death of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. They've been at this for 7 years. And before it became Black Lives Matter, they've been at this, right, for hundreds of years. But there's something different. There's something different about it now. And for me, the big difference was actually the Amy Cooper video. And if you don't know the Amy Cooper video, is this woman who is white, who was walking her dog in Central Park, and the dog was off a leash, and a black man whose last name is also Cooper, but like no relation, was bird watching, and he asked that the dog be put on a leash because those are the rules of the park. And she said, and she got very, she yelled a lot, and she said, "I'm going to call the police, and I'm going to tell them that an African-American man is threatening my life." And at that point, all he had said was, "Can you put your dog on a leash?" But she knew, and I think this was the tipping point. And in a way, I felt caught as a white person watching this video, because she knew that if she called the police and she said that, they're more likely to show up on the scene. And at best, he gets detained for a brief period while they sort it out. At worst, he experiences violence or death. And I think in that moment, when I watched it, I realized, oh, we just got caught, because she knew exactly how the system works. And I think that a lot of us, well, for me, a lot of times where I've seen things and I've said, I don't think, I try to explain it away because I don't want to believe that that's how the world works. I explain away things that happen in my own life because I don't want to believe that people want to do me harm for being queer. I explain things away because I don't want to believe that there's such active racism out there in the world. But in that moment, I felt like I just got caught as a white person. Like, oh, this really is how the system works. Yes. And I think there's a lot more of us that know it and haven't done anything yet. So.
Well, Kendall, thank you so much. We are over time. I wish we could keep you longer. Maybe you'll come back with us in a few months and talk again.
Be happy to.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kendall.
Thank you, Kendall. Hi, everybody.
Thank you. Kendall. Bye. Good to see your faces.
You too.
Thank you, Kendall.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good discussion.